Hi everyone, I'm Arjun from Factual.
And I'm Jill Soley.
Welcome to Factual Fridays. This Friday, the big topic of discussion in the country is Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination to the Supreme Court. And one of the questions that people are asking is, why was her gender and racial diversity such a big consideration in her nomination, as President Biden made out to be? At the Factual, we regularly poll our readers on topics that people are talking about. And our readership is pretty representative of the United States. Readers across all 50 states, 3,000 plus zip codes, pretty balanced politically. And so 635 votes, which is a statistically significant sample. And we had 55% of people say no, they would rather that racial diversity was not considered in nominations. 42% said yes. So that sets the stage on what we think the public feels that they don't want this consideration. And yet it was explicitly the consideration in President Biden's nomination and, of course, throughout this week.
Right.
So what do you think, Joe?
I actually think it should have been in this case. I don't think in an ideal world it should not be a consideration. But the world that we live in today, and given the history for the nominations, I do think it was the right thing to do. I'm not sure that Biden should have said it out loud that he was doing it and sort of announced that that was his decision. Historically, if you don't think that that has been part of the consideration all these years, you're fooling yourself, right? There's a reason that we had 9 white men for so many years. I mean, part of it was, of course, that was the only pool you could pick from.
Right. That's right.
And even still today, if you look at the courts below them, if you don't actually intentionally look for someone who is not a white man, you will probably get a white man just because the majority of the judges on the lower courts are white men.
So I think what's interesting about the polls and the comments that our readers leave, so our polls are anonymous, which allows people to leave hopefully the most honest comments because they're not worried about, professional blowback. What's very interesting is that both the people that voted yes, they wanted racial diversity to be a consideration, and no, actually said almost the same thing in the comments, which is what you said, which is ideal world, we don't want this. And the continued emphasis and talk about race as a qualifying criteria for so many things is almost further dividing the nation when that's not what it needs to be. But because of where we are and the history that we've got, sometimes we might need to do this. So a couple of comments that I thought were really interesting. One was on the side that said no, said, we're doing a disservice to Judge Jackson. She is eminently qualified. And now forever her career will be tagged with this, well, because you were a black woman, you got on the court. Meanwhile, she's a great judge. And so that was someone saying, no, they shouldn't have, because she was great. She should have won on that. And on the flip side, someone who said, yes, it should be, said, look, there are all kinds of qualifying criteria that we're using, and some we're not talking about. Okay, so some we do. There's explicitly that we allow, one president always picks conservative judges and another president always picks liberal judges. So you already had some criteria, which we shouldn't even be talking about because you should all be about qualifications. So if you could do that criteria, yeah, why the hell not? Why couldn't you care about race and gender? You did political ideology already. So I thought those are two very interesting points on why this is such a difficult issue.
Yeah. In an ideal world, we would just go and look purely at the records. Yeah. And we would just pick the best person for the job. And we would have a diverse pool to choose from.
That's right.
And we would just say, okay, you know what? Here are 3 stellar judges and pick from them. But there's so much history here. And there's so much, it has been so political. Yeah. I mean, and frankly, we should have a diverse set of judges who have diverse experience, diverse life experience, diverse cases, etc., coming to hear all the cases that are coming in front of them. Certainly, if ideology, which shouldn't be part of the discussion, right, for these cases, if that's an acceptable reason to choose a judge, then why not race or gender?
One of the things that I also like, one person who voted no had a really good comment, said, look, at the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve when we say diversity? We want diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, right? So that you get different angles on these really tough issues, and then somehow we arrive at a conclusion. But we're using proxies for it, like race and gender. Let's say, for example, we picked 9 judges that all went to Harvard. You're getting a certain type of view because of that. Okay, great. They might have been racial and genderly diverse, but they all went to Harvard Law School. It's not particularly diverse. Why didn't you pick someone from the South and someone from the West?
Though that said, I guarantee you that, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Ketanji Brown Jackson have some different life experience and therefore
True.
different perspectives than Brett Kavanaugh does.
True. But I think so. What this commenter was saying is we started to make diversity be only about observable characteristics, primarily race and gender. But if you're really trying to drive for diversity of opinions, like we could have said, for example, we want someone who is a mother. Okay, that's a really good sort of diversity. Because if you're not a mother or a parent for that matter, there's some things that are just hard to really understand when it comes to children if you've never had one. So I can see that as being an interesting criteria and probably one that most people would sort of get behind. We need to have some parents on the bench. Seems like a good thing,
Yeah.
And so some of this sort of gets left behind. And another very interesting one was, Asian Americans saying, wow, we didn't even have a shot at this seat at all. We were just completely screened out. It's the kind of thing that it just irks everyone. It irked the people you were supporting. It irked the people you were against. It was just bad all around.
Well, the political mistake, I think, was Biden announcing, I am going to put a black woman on the bench, right?
Yes.
If he just not done that at all,
and
he had he then put together his pool,
a big pool of lots of qualified people,
and very intentionally had minority women on in that pool, and ended up with Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is by all standards and incredibly stellar judge. Had she then just ended up on the bench, it would not be an issue, right?
So now what I think is very interesting, you mentioned a couple times, is the history of how we got here. And so this was the second question that I think people have been talking about this week, is these confirmation hearings. I think it's fair to say that these confirmation hearings are really quite useless. A lot of people are saying, like, what are we getting out of this? And by the way, it's a very expensive hearing if you think about, like, collective time of all these senators and everyone. I mean, this has got to be one of the most expensive wastes of time in the last 3 years.
Oh my God. Can't they be doing something better?
Right. We know what's going to happen. We know the end result.
Well, and their questioning is more them pontificating than anything else, right?
When the question lasts like 8 minutes before you get to it, this is a media.
And the questions that some of these questions are completely ridiculous.
And so what I thought was interesting is if you look at some of the articles that we highlighted in the Factual, because we give you different viewpoints. So we had a really high-ranking article from Commentary Magazine, which is a well-known conservative outlet. We had articles from the Daily Beast, from Fox, from AP News as well, more on the left, Washington Times on the right, lots of different views, and saying, if you're disgusted by the questions that are being asked of Judge Jackson, let's go and look at what they asked of Gorsuch, of Amy Coney Barrett, and of Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh is a little bit of an exception because there was a real concern about character there. But on the other two, it was also quite bad at times. And on Coney Barrett, they really grilled her on her faith and what her Christian background, how it would affect things, versus really talking about her judicial sort of background and her thinking on the law. One of the most interesting facts that we uncovered is prior to 1990, most confirmations were actually pretty, like they would go through with a large majority approving them.
Yeah.
And now it's become so much closer. It's so partisan. And the second fact I thought was interesting, so we had this chart in the Factual about what fraction of the time judges agree with and disagree with each other. And what's interesting is that you had conservative and liberal judges, on the extremes. Even Clarence Thomas, very conservative, and RBG, when she was on the bench, very liberal. They agreed with each other like 65% of the time. And I thought that was just really useful to call out that we think these judges are so different and just have nothing in common. Turns out most of the time they actually do agree with each other. And they really are trying to judge on the merits of the law. For example, Neil Gorsuch was thought to be a very conservative judge and a very pro-business judge. And then Gorsuch ruled on a case saying that people should have the right to sue Apple for products that have not lived up to their expectations of that. And everyone's like, wait, you were supposed to be the pro-business guy. And so Gorsuch has turned out to be liberal a bunch of times. Kavanaugh has turned out to rule with the liberals a bunch of times on things that are pretty divisive. They haven't had abortion come up yet. But I think it's just a misnomer to think that these judges are sort of simplistic figures that just rule based on, well, I'm liberal, I'm always going to rule this way. Actually, I think they really do try very hard to rule on the merits of the judges. So I feel like what's the worst part of this whole week is that it just further decreases our respect for this institution and these 9 judges when actually they're pretty good.
Yeah.
And
well, not just the judges, but frankly, the Senate.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was embarrassing, frankly, this week on all sides to think that this is our government.
And it certainly seemed like from the questions that were getting the most media and all this stuff, it was just the nonsensical stuff that wasn't really validating her as a judge and how she might rule on difficult things. So, yeah, upshot of it was I think most of the American public not very happy with the past week, regardless of whether you're a liberal or conservative.
Yeah.
Hopefully this gives you all listening some sense of why this issue is so divisive, what are all the different opinions behind it, and perhaps what the American public really would have liked to have seen in this past week and with the nomination process in general, maybe something to hope for in the future.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll point people to the poll and to the articles in the notes.
That's right, yes. Everything will be down below this video, so you can click on all the stuff, and then you can see details on why the Factual rated these articles highly and suggested them from across the political spectrum.